Hello, hey everybody. This is Ian Carlin from the Empty Cup podcast. I want to do a vlog on not necessarily quick, but a vlog which will I will express my thoughts on karate and is karate legit for a real fight? Is karate legit for a real fight, or are you wasting your time learning karate? And can karate be legit for a real fight? All that stuff. Okay, so not an episode of the Empty Cup podcast, just a martial vlog where I talk about some of my ideas. So, say this real quickly. Well, not real quickly, but take my time to say this here. Karate can be one of the most legitimate martial arts that there are. Okay, but you have to have three elements in order. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who practices doesn't have these three elements can't be good in other areas, but you have to have these three elements for it to be karate and to be legit. But if you have these three elements, karate can be one of the most legit martial arts out there. Number one, it has to be an older style of karate. Okay, it can't be a newer style of karate, particularly when it comes to the kata. The katas have got to have some of the ancient roots to them. And if it is a new style of karate, that's the kata has got to be old. The kata has got to have some connection to the old style of kata that they used to do. It cannot be a kata that was invented even in the 40s and 50s and 60s, where a lot of these katas were invented from people who were actually making martial arts. They were doing like new style martial arts. Okay, and I'll talk about why in a minute. Number two, you have to know the bukai, which means the reason for what you're doing in the form, okay, in the kata. And number three, you have to resistance train, okay? So you have to resistance train the bukai specifically. So if you have these three elements, what is offered in some of these really old, like Okinawan and Japanese style karates can be, and actually are legit. They are legit. So why do I say all of this? Okay, so let me break down and kind of assemble my thoughts here. Number one, the purposes of kata in the first place was not to win gold in a tournament or anything like that, or to look necessarily flashy. The reason why people developed kata was to encode their information about fighting in a routine. This was a time when this was developed. They had books and people did not, but not everybody drew, real well, and not a lot of people read. So you could, in theory, make a book about your martial art, but it was much easier to encode it in a system of moves. And so that's why the system of moves that came up with in older martial arts and older, like Okinawan styles, were legitimate moves that you would see even in MMA today if you know the bukai, okay? If you know the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And the moves aren't, they're just like, it's just like a piece of the fight. It's not the whole fight. It's like you might have like a move where you have, when I came from Tang Soo Do, so I'll get to that in a minute. But you might just have a piece of the move in which, and that's what it was. It was like a piece of the fight. And if you look at it and you look at the bukai and you look at these old forms and what they're actually doing, it's really similar to a lot of what you're learning in MMA. The problem is that people don't understand the bukai. They don't understand what these moves mean. And it's not MMA's fault either. It's not like they're dumb or anything like that. I'm not saying that. It's just that we have, unfortunately, what we have is we have a group of people, a large group of people who do katas or do more modernized katas that are made to look flashy, and they think that doing the kata is a measure of the fight. And then they don't resistance train on top of that. So, but if you look at, and I would ask you to please go look at like karate, MMA. There's good videos out there where it actually breaks down and it actually shows side by side moves that are done in the cage with moves that are done in the kata. But again, these are older style katas with that were actually meant to encode their information so that they could pass those things on to their students if the student knew the kata and knew the bukai that went with it. It wasn't sparring, but then that's the third point is you have to resistance train that bukai. Okay, so if you do those three things, you will have a fairly legitimate stand-up art. Okay, or at least at least a legitimate set of tools for a stand-up art. A lot of this stuff looks, when you look at somebody explaining a kata who knows what they're doing, a lot of the moves are stuff that you would see just in an MMA gym, like taking the legs, like a double leg takedown or a single leg takedown, or coming up with a triangle block, an elbow triangle block, and then coming down. It just, there's so many things that are in those katas that are close to MMA. And again, there are videos out there of the something out of the kata and then a little piece of it that you would see in an MMA situation. So you got to have so you got to have basically the katas, the older katas were legitimate moves. But then you have to be able to explain those legitimate moves. And then you have to do the final thing, and that's be able to pressure test those legitimate moves so that you know them when they work in a fight. So if for example, I've come up with this, and I was going to use this on another example, but let's say all I ever did was hit a heavy bag, okay? And like I was a good fighter, but when people saw me hit heavy bags, and they started hitting heavy bags, and they never pressure test that. They just do, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, but they never pressure tested that. And all you saw was this group of people doing jab, cross, hook, uppercut, jab, cross, hook, uppercut. And then they never pressure test it. Then along comes somebody who, like, maybe from, let's say, Kyokushin karate. And, they're fighting full contact. And this guy does jab. His moves are legit. He may not understand what they're for, but, just supposing generations down, this person doesn't really understand what they're for, and he's never pressure tested it. Well, he's going to get his butt kicked. Well, that doesn't mean his movements aren't legit if he has somebody there to explain it to him, what he's doing, and to explain and to pressure test it, okay? So any move that isn't pressure tested can become an illegitimate move. It doesn't matter how good the move is, but you've got to have both. You've got to have the movement and the pressure tested, and the pressure testing of it. Now, that doesn't mean that that karate is a complete martial art. There's a lot of stuff that is incomplete. For example, there's ground stuff that's just absent that they would need to adopt, and or at least supplement. And then the other thing is that doesn't mean that every karate move is the best way to do that move. So I want to qualify a few things. So for instance, I remember one time I was doing some friends of mine, and we were red belts in Tang Soo Do at the time. Our red belts in the White Dragon martial arts system, which was basically the Tang Soo Do system with added stuff to it. And we went to Vegas, and there was this video game there where it was basically like kind of like a speed bag, and it was hooked to a screen, and on the screen was like this truck coming at you, and you would hit this heavy bag, and it would register the pressure you hit, and how hard you hit it would, the truck would get beat up, and then the little guy was hitting the truck as you were hitting the speed bag, and it would register it wasn't exactly like a speed bag, it was like a speed bag, but It's hard to explain. Anyway, it would register how hard you hit, and then how hard you hit would show a dent in the truck and all that stuff. Well, I really thought that if I just aligned my body perfectly and threw the perfect reverse punch with the hips and everything landing at once, just like you're looking for in that kata, shoom, that there would be no problem. Just bang, this would hit this and it would go flying, and I'd put this big dent in this truck. Well, I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't get any power. I got some power from it. But what was interesting is there was this other guy who was playing, who played it after us. It was like we were kind of like in line and all this stuff. And anyway, there's a guy who played it, and he was watching us, and we were watching him. And he was just throwing across, and not even a great one, just kind of almost like it was a little bit better than just like a backhanded haymaker. And he was rocking this thing. I mean, way more power than any of the three of us red belts were doing. And I was just blown away. I was just like, I didn't even know what to do with that information, because my whole life I thought, if I just land those hips squarely and perfectly and everything locked into place, and I just boom, locked into place, then then of course, that would be it. I mean, that's just going to be the most power there is, and there wasn't. So the point of the story is that karate can be, that doesn't mean that everything in karate is the best way to do things. I'm not saying that, okay? So I have, some reservations about some of the techniques being the best techniques. They're not always the best techniques, and you can learn from other styles like boxing and kickboxing and things like that. The other thing I wanted to say was, what about these newer styles? Well, so for instance, I came from Tang Soo Do, in which I learned like my first four katas: Gi Chu Young, Ildu, Sangap, and anyway, the names of those, probably I couldn't name them all at this point. Where I'm just moving from forward stance to forward stance and throwing center punches to center punches and kicks and just down the line. And somebody could say, well, and there's a reason that those katas look different than like an ancient Okinawan system, where the movements are very fluid, they're very sharp, they're very powerful, and they go from kind of like a movement to movement. They're not like I forms. They're like, you do this thing over here, then you do this thing over here, and then you do this thing over here. It's because they're actually practicing movements that worked at a time, and they could still work today if they're pressure tested. So moving from forward stance to forward stance to forward stance to then eventually forward stance to back stance to forward stance to forward stance to back stance to forward stance, and then how if you know Tang Soo Do and its cousin Taekwondo or brother Taekwondo, you know what I'm talking about. Those aren't legitimate. You're just, now that doesn't mean that you can't study that and be a legitimate fighter. It's just that you're not using that as your legitimate techniques. And don't lie to yourself, because I know what I would do is I would practice those. I'd look really good at my kata, but what I would do when I fought was something different, something totally different. It wasn't in the katas at all. It was, kickboxing basically is what we were trying to emulate, kickboxing. So I'd spend all this time learning the reverse punch and this full fold downward block and full forward upward block. And then we go, okay, let's spar. And no one would do that. Why wouldn't we do that? Well, because it didn't work. Because the bukai in that is not, it's not good for a fight. Now, you might want to do it for other reasons. That's fine. I still sometimes practice those katas to get myself warmed up. I understand, and I understand the mentality. It says, well, they're foundational. Okay, well, great. But you can learn that. You can learn those foundations other ways that are better and will get you better at fighting quicker. Okay? So I think that is all I wanted to say for this vlog. I know that there's a couple other things, but they escape me right now. But so basically, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Yes, karate can be a legitimate martial art. As a matter of fact, the moves that they have in there are some really cool, legitimate moves if they come from an, or at least have their roots in some older style, because those are the moves. And then the person knows the bukai, which is the interpretation, the correct interpretation of those moves, and they have pressure tested those moves. And if they've pressure tested those moves and they find out which moves work for them, then karate, in my opinion, is actually very, very legitimate. And somebody who does those three things is somebody to look out for, and they're just as good as anybody else. Again, are those the only way to do those things? Can there be some improvement? Yes, there can be some improvement. And let's see. And is it a complete system? No, it isn't quite a complete system because it lacks groundwork, and best to go where the groundwork is to learn that, and it may lack some other things too. So, anyway, not my complete thoughts on it. I'm sure as soon as I turn this off, I'll have other thoughts on it. But that's my thought on whether or not karate is legit. If you like this, please subscribe, please share.